There was a time when some of the most famous paintings in the world were considered bad art.
Critics laughed at them.
They called them unfinished. They called them careless. Some even believed the artists had forgotten how to paint. But those artists were not failing. They were changing the way humanity would see the world. They were painting light, movement, atmosphere, modern life. And they were about to create one of the most influential revolutions in the history of art. This was Impressionism. Welcome to The Art Evolve. Today, we are going back to 19th century France to discover how a group of rebellious artists challenged the rules of the art establishment and transformed painting forever. Before Impressionism, European painting was dominated by tradition. For centuries, the most respected artists were expected to follow established rules. The most important paintings often depicted historical events, mythology, religion, powerful rulers, or dramatic scenes from the past. Artists were trained to create highly polished surfaces. Brushstrokes were supposed to disappear. Paintings were expected to look finished. The more refined the technique, the greater the artist was considered. And if an artist wanted recognition, there was one institution that mattered enormously: the Paris Salon. The official salon was the center of the French art world. Being accepted into the salon could make an artist's career. Being rejected could make survival extremely difficult. A painting could be technically brilliant and still be rejected because it did not fit the expectations of the establishment. But outside the official art world, something extraordinary was happening. Paris was changing. The city was being transformed by modernization. New boulevards were being constructed. Railways connected cities and countryside. Cafes became gathering places. Theaters and dance halls attracted growing audiences. People traveled more. Photography was becoming increasingly important, and everyday modern life itself was becoming a subject worthy of artistic attention. A new generation of artists began asking an uncomfortable question. Why should artists continue painting only the past? Why not paint the world around them? Why not paint ordinary people? Why not paint streets, gardens, cafes, rivers, train stations, dancers, workers, and sunlight? And most importantly, why should a painting have to look perfectly finished? Among the artists challenging these ideas was Edouard Manet. Manet was not exactly an impressionist in the same way as Monet or Renoir, but his influence was enormous. He challenged conventional ideas about what could be considered a serious subject for art. His paintings shocked audiences because they brought modern life directly onto the canvas. One of his most controversial works was Olympia. Instead of presenting an idealized goddess from mythology, Manet painted a contemporary woman looking directly at the viewer. The painting caused an uproar. People were uncomfortable, but Manet had opened a door that could not easily be closed. Another artist was about to push that door even further. His name was Claude Monet. Monet became obsessed with something that seems simple, but is extraordinarily difficult to capture: light. He discovered that the appearance of a landscape could change completely depending on the time of day. A building painted in the morning did not look the same in the afternoon. Water changed every second. Snow reflected unexpected colors. Shadows were not simply black. They contained blue, purple, green, and other subtle colors. Monet wanted to capture these fleeting impressions before they disappeared. This became one of the central ideas of Impressionism. Instead of painting what an object was supposed to look like, the Impressionists tried to paint what they actually experienced at a particular moment. And this changed everything. They often worked outdoors, directly in front of their subjects. They painted quickly. They used visible brushstrokes. They placed colors next to one another rather than blending everything into smooth surfaces. They experimented with complementary colors. They allowed the viewer's eye to participate in the painting. From a distance, the colors could merge. Up close, the brushstrokes remained visible. The painting was no longer simply an imitation of reality. It became an experience of seeing. But the art establishment was not impressed. In 1874, a group of artists organized an independent exhibition in Paris. They were tired of waiting for approval from the official salon. They wanted to show their work on their own terms. Among the paintings was a small canvas by Claude Monet. It depicted the harbor of Le Havre at sunrise. Monet called it impression, sunrise. The painting was atmospheric. The forms were loose. The sun appeared as a small orange disk surrounded by mist. The water was suggested through rapid brushstrokes. To Monet, it was an impression of a particular moment. To one critic, it was evidence that these artists did not know how to paint. The critic used the word impression mockingly, but the artists took the insult and turned it into their identity. Impressionists. A new art movement had been named. What began as criticism became history. The Impressionists were not all alike. They had different personalities, different subjects, different techniques, but they shared a desire to break away from the rigid traditions of academic painting. Pierre-Auguste Renoir was fascinated by people. He painted gatherings, dancers, cafes, gardens, and moments of leisure. His paintings captured sunlight falling across human faces and clothing. He wanted his figures to feel alive. Edgar Degas was fascinated by movement. He became famous for his paintings and drawings of dancers. But he wasn't simply interested in ballet. He was interested in the human body in motion. He experimented with unusual viewpoints and compositions influenced partly by photography and Japanese prints. Sometimes his figures appeared cropped at the edge of the canvas. The result felt spontaneous, almost like a moment captured by a camera. And then there was Berthe Morisot. At a time when women faced enormous restrictions in professional life, Morisot became one of the most important members of the Impressionist movement. She painted women, children, gardens, interiors, and everyday life with remarkable sensitivity. Her brushwork could be delicate and energetic at the same time. She participated in the Impressionist exhibitions and earned the respect of her fellow artists. Her story reminds us that the history of Impressionism was not only a story of famous men. Women were essential to the movement. Another important figure was Camille Pissarro. He experimented constantly and influenced younger artists throughout his career. Paul Cézanne would later take Impressionism in a very different direction. And although Vincent van Gogh was not an Impressionist in the strict sense, the movement's use of color and brushwork would profoundly influence his own development. This is one of the most important things about art movements. They do not exist in isolation. One generation challenges the previous generation. The next generation takes those ideas and changes them again. Impressionism opened the door to modern art. But why was Impressionism so revolutionary? Because it changed the question artists were asking. For centuries, artists had often asked, how accurately can I represent this object? The Impressionists increasingly asked, how does this object appear to me right now? That may sound like a small difference. It was not. It moved art away from absolute representation and toward perception. The painting became connected to the experience of the person looking. Light became a subject. Atmosphere became a subject. Time became a subject. The fleeting moment became a subject. And suddenly, an ordinary scene could become worthy of great art. A train station, a river, a garden, a woman walking down a street, a group of friends having lunch, a dancer practicing backstage, a sunrise. The Impressionists taught audiences that beauty did not have to come from the distant past. It could be found in modern life. One of Monet's greatest experiments came later in his career. He began painting the same subjects repeatedly under different conditions. Haystacks, poplar trees, the facade of Rouen Cathedral. The subject remained almost the same.
But the light changed.
The weather changed. The atmosphere changed. And therefore the painting changed. Monet was no longer simply painting haystacks. He was painting time. He was painting light as it passed across the world. Eventually, Monet moved to Giverny, where he created a garden that would become one of the most famous artistic environments in history. There he planted flowers, built a Japanese-style bridge, and created a pond filled with water lilies. The garden became his living laboratory. He observed reflections,
Clouds,
water, flowers, sunlight,
mist,
and he painted them again and again. His water lilies series eventually moved towards something even more radical. The horizon sometimes disappeared. The water filled the canvas. Reflections became abstract shapes. The viewer was no longer looking at a traditional landscape. The viewer was entering an atmosphere. This would influence generations of modern artists. But Impressionism was not immediately accepted. Many artists struggled financially. Some paintings received terrible reviews. Some artists lived in poverty. Collectors were slow to recognize their importance. Yet the movement continued. Eventually, public opinion began to change. People started buying Impressionist paintings. Museums began collecting them. Artists A.R.